They hid the countdown, the one UAP pilot report that warned of a first strike. The clock on his HUD hit T00:03:12, and every vector on the scope snapped to 550 knots. 5 tracks, same bearing, closing without heat, without boom. He keyed the mic to call weapons hold, and the feed cut to black. When it came back, the countdown was gone, and so was the audio. We found the radar printout they tried to bury, time-coded and authenticated. If that clock was real, it wasn't a timer, it was a lock. They scrubbed comms, sealed the file, and reassigned the pilot. Stay with me. I'll show you the anomaly code and why that countdown mattered. First, the flight. Contamination. The flight that shouldn't exist. He was the kind of pilot you don't sideline. 2 combat cruises on the resume, 1 Pacific, 1 Gulf, plus instructor time in the F/A-18 that turned muscle memory into method. The kind of calm that comes from watching students scare themselves and bringing them home anyway. On May 17, 2019, it was routine. A daytime training block inside Warning Area W. 291 off the Pacific Northwest coast. Restricted airspace, blue-on-blue intercepts, clean jets with captive rounds. Nothing that should have raised a heartbeat. Weather was clear, ducting low, sea state 3. He climbed to the CAP stack and checked in with range control like he'd done 100 times, voice level, hands light. Then 5 returns appeared at once, and his chest tightened a half beat before his brain caught up. They didn't walk onto the radar like aircraft. They were just there, simultaneous, equidistant, each painting a velocity vector that shouldn't have been possible in that altitude band. His breathing shortened, the way it does when a sim goes sideways, except this wasn't a sim. Deconfliction lights on the scope flagged no known participants. Range control had nothing, AWACS had nothing, and the Mode 5 interrogations came back the way a mirror answers a question. It reflects you and says nothing. Here's what he saw. The tracks held formation with separation that matched the geometry of the restricted area's corners, like they were reading a map none of us had. Their ground speed went from sub 200 to 550 knots without the usual acceleration curve. No thermal bloom, no contrails, no sonic threshold. His fingers eased pressure on the stick to keep the microshakes out of the tape. He pushed to bracket the westernmost return, rolled level, and waited for the noise you feel more than hear. The air stayed quiet. He called it in. Calm voice, the kind that settles other people down. 5 unknowns, non-cooperative, transiting the box. Request intercept vectors. The controller's reply started, then clipped, like someone pressed pause mid-sentence. Another voice came over a separate net, authority in the cadence. Hold. Maintain position. Do not commit. That didn't fit the book. Unknowns inside the range get pushed or painted hard. He asked for clarification. The reply used a phrase he'd only heard in sim. Silence. Tactical. While he held, the anomaly moved. Not toward him, not toward the base, around. The 5 returns slid into a pentagonal lattice, each node equidistant, each vector aligning to the next as if sharing a clock. That's when the overlay appeared on his HUD. T00:03:12. White text, top right, not a format he recognized. The digits rolled down with the smooth certainty of a weapon timer, but he hadn't armed anything. His wingman didn't see it. His recording did. The radar page began showing paired symbols he'd only seen during data link troubleshooting. A tiny caret nested over each track, pulsing. He thought spoofing, then watched the caret pulse in exact phase across all 5. Meanwhile, the formation geometry tightened. He eased into a lead pursuit curve, just enough to force a reaction if these were conventional aircraft. Nothing changed except the clock. At T00:02:40, the vectors stabilized at 550 knots, heading that would take the formation along the seam of 2 grid sectors outside the range. He called the seam by name. Pilots do this the way firefighters know hydrants, and the frequency went dead. Seconds later, a 3rd net lit up. All players, execute radio silence. Maintain altitude. Wait for tasking. That order requires signatures. In the air, you obey first. He stared at the digits and did what good pilots do. He ran the what-ifs. If the clock was a system error, it would have reset on page change. It didn't. If it was a recorded overlay, it wouldn't drive symbology behavior. It did. His targeting box began to lead, a point ahead of the western node, like the jet believed an intercept solution existed in space the contact hadn't reached yet. He had never seen that. At T00:01:10, a subaudible tone bled into the intercom, like carrier hum, just on the edge of hearing. His wingman reported nothing unusual, except a flicker on the SA page. The lead's HUD timer ticked past the minute mark. He toggled master arm safe to master arm back to safe. A superstition more than a procedure. The carrot pulses quickened. He asked for permission to commit. The net answered with silence, and under it, the tone rising by a fraction. He did something small and human. He glanced left, out of the canopy, looking for anything his screens might miss. The water looked like water. The sky looked like sky. He rolled back eyes forward and saw the overlay roll to T00:00:30. Then came the breach point. All 5 returns drifted closer to their lattice centers, tightened separation to a distance that would have made human pilots sweat, and snapped into a perfect star. The timer hit T00:00:10. He called countdown displayed, because that's the only word that made sense. The response he got wasn't a response. It was a command that didn't fit training airspace. Standby. Marker in 10. Marker. Not countdown, not timer. Marker. He keyed up to confirm, and the feed cut out, video and audio, leaving his recorder with a thin, rising tone and a frozen frame of the HUD at T00:00:03. When the video resumed, the tracks were gone. Not faded. Gone. The timer field was empty space. His jet systems threw no faults. Range control read like it had never spoken to him. He carried 2 details home that day. The vectors were real, and the silence was ordered. If the countdown tracked doctrine, it meant intent. To understand why the clock mattered, we need to go back 2 years. And we'll keep our dates straight. ADIP formally ran 2007 to 2012, and the Tic Tac intercept was November 2004 off the Southern California coast. The pattern before the clock, pre-strike positioning. 2 years earlier, something quiet started showing up where quiet doesn't belong. Not lights over cornfields or shaky phone clips, clusters. Returns that arrived in 4s and 5s near places that live behind fences and non-disclosure agreements. A boom few talk about. Nuclear command nodes in the middle of nowhere. Undersea cable landings that move a nation's heartbeat. Over-the-horizon radar sites that see beyond the curve. They never lingered on the postcard targets. They brushed the switches. While that was happening along the coast, a different pattern took shape over water. Civilian mariners called them ghost squalls. Blotches on shipboard radar that rolled like weather but held a coarse line you could draw with a ruler. On the Navy side, tech started logging low probability of intercept signatures that looked like atmospheric clutter. It read like storm noise. It behaved like intent. Here's the part they couldn't disguise with jargon. The flight paths formed lattices. Night after night, track segments stacked into geometric nets across airspace you only thread with permission. Lines bent around restricted zones, then reconnected at the seams. Think of it like someone laying fishing nets not over the fish, but over the inlets that feed the bay. If you control the inlets, you don't have to chase anything. Unknown to them, across the desert, controllers on tower tapes started using a phrase that never makes a briefing slide. Chessboard nights. It wasn't poetry. It was shorthand for evenings when the scope filled with faint, obedient moves, squares and diagonals, pieces advancing, always stopping just outside a line they weren't supposed to cross. A radar operator joked about teaching his kid the game by replaying tapes. He didn't laugh the second time. Meanwhile, maintenance hangars told a different story. Sensor suites that had finally stabilized after years of software updates got rolled back. Not once. Again and again. Firmware versions pinned to dates that coincided with chessboard nights. The forms read like bureaucracy, but the pattern was simple. When the nets appeared, the sensors went backward. If you're confident in your picture, you don't rewind the equipment that paints it. What nobody knew at the time was how those clustered nights stitched together. Airports on opposite coasts reported brief loss of long-range returns within the same 20-minute windows. A submarine cable operator filed an internal note about anomalous noise coinciding with coastal airspace restrictions. A coastal over-the-horizon radar site logged false weather returns that tapered at exactly the distances you'd choose if you were trying to blanket the display, not the sky. Each event alone looked like noise. Together, they looked like rehearsal. From the perspective of the crews in the air, the weirdness came as absences. You'd get a perfect traffic picture, then a patch of nothing where something should be, like a block cut from film. Controllers called for altitudes and headings that made sense in a storm, except there was no storm. Pilots jotted unusual vectoring and got back to training. One detail would matter later. The vectors often nudged them away from grid seams, those invisible boundaries where power and data hand off between regions. 3 days before one of those nights, a coastal radar tech wrote, "Weather firmware. Rollback per directive." That's not a phrase people outside those rooms hear. Roll back a radar's weather filters, and you make it more likely to mistake intelligent motion for clouds, or clouds for something else. On the tapes, faint returns walked in straight, orthogonal lines, then dissolved when the filters returned. The logs blamed inversion layers. The timing blamed the directive. While that was happening in the Pacific Northwest, a Navy P-8 crew tracked a pattern of subsurface pings that aligned with airborne returns within milliseconds. They filed it as possible sonar reflection from surface clutter. Months later, the same crew started calling those nights grid walks, because the tracks behaved like they were stepping from node to node, touching the intersections where comms, power, and data happened to share the same conduit trench. A microstory survived redactions. A junior controller in a Midwest approach facility tapped his pen whenever the lattice formed. He didn't realize he did it until a supervisor told him to stop. When asked why, he said, "Because they count." He couldn't define they. He could count the intervals, 90 seconds, then 60, then 45, repeat. That cadence would echo on a tape we'll hear later. Pushback came packaged as training narratives. Drone swarms. Aggressor exercises. Atmospheric ducting. Those words can be true and still miss what the nights felt like to the people in the loop. Air crews started logging a specific kind of oddity. Requested reroutes that preserved neat rectangles of air untouched, like placeholders. The rectangles overlapped the boring infrastructure nobody puts on posters: switch yards, repeater farms, cable huts, pumping stations. None of those locations sparkle from 20,000 feet. They matter anyway. Then a leak surfaced, one page that explains the silence. Before we get there, one more detail they couldn't bury. A set of maintenance records showed not just rollbacks, but synchronized rollbacks across different sensor types: airborne radar, ground-based primary, even civilian weather. The timestamps matched within a minute. On the nights when the nets were fullest, the eyes that could have seen them all shifted to settings most likely to see less. On public tapes, you also see separate, documented UAP incidents that rhyme with the pattern. Langley AFB's airspace restrictions and radar tracks in 2023 in Hampton, Virginia. Security alerts and reported UAS/UAP intrusions around Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station near Tonopah, Arizona in 2019 to 2021, and repeated drone/UAP reports near Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in Livermore, California, 2019 to 2020. None of these prove authorship. They show the same seams getting nervous. If this sounds like curiosity, it isn't. Curiosity wandered. This repeated. The clustered incursions kept to seams, focused on choke points, and timed themselves in ways that preserved a rhythm across miles and domains. The patterns point to rehearsal. For what becomes clearer with the page we got. Then a leak surfaced, redactions and a single line that put a name, or at least an acronym, to what we'd been watching. The one page, redactions and a single line. It arrived folded inside a manila envelope that looked like it had been handled by people who don't leave fingerprints. No cover letter, just one photocopied page with the margins shaved and most of the nouns missing under black bars. At the top, the header ran like a freight train. Restricted Annex, distribution controlled, reference chain pointing to a larger report none of us are authorized to see. 2 stamps mattered. One date format that matched DoD templates from that quarter, and a routing code that would have sent this straight through a joint operations cell, not a public affairs office. The subject line used a phrase you almost never see outside internal threat boards: non-cooperative unknowns. That's doctrine for things that won't talk, won't squawk, and won't follow rules. Under that, there were bullet points. Most were gone. One wasn't. It read like an alarm with the vowels stripped. NTSTK protocol invoked, countdown telemetry observed, op immediate. The rest blurred into redaction. The sentence stood there anyway, a nail through wood. Here's why that line mattered. Op immediate isn't throwaway language. It's a trigger that pulls legal authorities. None of these agencies admit to activating outside war or a direct, declared threat. It means someone with a real signature decided the thing on the screen wasn't a training drone, wasn't a weather ghost, wasn't a student pilot out of his lane. It meant action, right then, not a white paper drafted 6 weeks later. If you've spent any time around classified annexes, you know the tone. This one read like the room had stopped breathing. We checked the bones. Classification block layout matched the style used after a specific overhaul 2 years earlier. The capitalization patterns in the caveats fit. The routing line included a peculiar hyphenation that shows up in other authenticated annexes. Tiny tells humans don't fake well. The date stamp aligned with a cluster night we'd already mapped by independent sources. Even the page footer spacing, the number of spaces before the hyphen, matched a template we pulled from a separate FOIA release. You look for forgeries by looking for laziness. This page wasn't lazy. Pushback arrived fast and bland. Training exercise. The phrase floated like a life ring tossed from a distance. The problem? Exercises don't use language that keys authorities outside Title 10 walls unless they scream exercise at every paragraph. This page didn't. The Annex reference chain pointed to a real-world incident number. And non-cooperative unknowns isn't how you describe blue air pretending to be red air on a Tuesday. You could write exercise inject. They didn't. They wrote like they were covering themselves for a decision that would be audited later by people with badges. Zoom in on the middle of the page, and you see the only other crumb they left us. A time code block that recorded telemetry observed, then a colon, then nothing. That's not sloppiness. That's a redaction, conscious, specific, of whatever numbers or signals justified the invocation. But the grammar tells you it existed. Telemetry is not a vibe. It's data. It suggests a stream. And the word before telemetry, the one you'd expect to see in a missile test or a satellite deployment, was the same one that sat on our pilot's HUD countdown. The Annex didn't say clock. It didn't say timer. It said countdown telemetry. Telemetry implies an external source feeding a system that can listen. That supports what our signals analyst would later call a synchronization marker, not a human-facing stopwatch. It meant the network, whoever or whatever built it, was broadcasting a cadence, and someone in our chain knew what it meant well enough to label it without hand-waving. If you're going to pretend it's weather, you don't mention telemetry. You say artifact. They didn't. We ran authenticity markers past people who filed the paperwork that makes these pages exist. Routing codes resolved to a joint tasking office that sits at the intersection of air, maritime, and space coordination. Date formats matched the internal convention for that quarter, day, month, year without commas. The classification block used the exact parentheses order we've seen in other restricted annexes filed to the same custodian. You can fake ink. It's hard to fake bureaucratic muscle memory. Then there's the acronym they left like a trap, NTSTK. The line used it without a gloss, assuming the reader already spoke the language. If it were exercise slang, you'd expect a parenthetical on first use. It didn't get one. We asked around quietly. The loudest response was silence. The few words we got danced around definitions and stopped when the letters were repeated back. One retired planner said, "Don't chase that one," and changed the subject. Another asked how we'd heard it, then asked again slower. We pressed the training claim against the language. Exercises love their disclaimers. They're printed on every slide to prevent the wrong kind of phone call. This page had none. Instead, it had a distribution list that would bring in continuity liaisons and legal counsel by default, because op immediate wakes people up who write authorities into binders. You don't burn those circuits to test a radio. You burn them when you think time is about to run out. The page closed with a meeting notation, 2 words and a date, redacted, then readable on the second line in the copier's shadow. The date mapped to one of the chessboard knights. The notation referenced an Annex letter we've seen elsewhere attached to continuity briefings. That's the seam where our air story brushes the ground story, where temporal deconfliction shows up in attendee notes like the most normal phrase in the world. It isn't normal, so we're left with a single unredacted sentence that does more than suggest. It records action taken because a countdown signal was seen, and it uses an acronym nobody will define on the record. We'll chase those letters, but to decode them, you follow people, not paper. The insider who flinched, quiet confirmation. We didn't find him. He found us by not hanging up. A retired signals analyst, Navy first, joint later, the kind of career that leaves you with acronyms for reflexes. We'd asked a broad question in a public way about timing anomalies on Mode 5 IFF. He replied with a time, a number blocked, and one condition: No names, no recordings, and we could quote concepts, not phrases. He started where professionals start, with the pipe, not the story. Mode 5, he said, isn't just a challenge and reply. It's a digital handshake riding a tight timing budget. If you want to hide, you don't jam the handshake, you ride inside it, like slipping into a doorway right behind the person with the badge. Piggyback, he said, then corrected himself to co-multiplex, because piggyback sounded sloppy. He described packets that shouldn't have been there, low rate, well-behaved, never enough to trip an alarm, just enough to leave a fingerprint if you knew where to dust. He refused the word countdown. He called it a synchronization marker, and let the term sit. The marker wasn't content, it was cadence. Think of a metronome you can't hear, but your instruments feel. The packets arrived at intervals that squeezed closer over time, a nudge toward phase lock. That's what you do when you're trying to make separate systems behave like one. We asked how he knew it wasn't a test. He said tests have rehearsal paperwork, and rehearsal paperwork leaks. This didn't. What they saw were anomalies flagged by tools built to catch spoofing. Except the spoofing tools stopped firing after the first week, because the packets looked too clean to trigger the messy threshold. You don't break in with noise, he said. You break in with manners. From his perspective, the moment that mattered wasn't a radar picture or a pilot tape. It was a checksum that should have failed and didn't. A block of bits arrived with a code that said, "I'm intact." The code verified against itself, and the host system rolled it forward like a welcome guest. The only way that happens at scale is if the intruder understands the host's patience, its tolerance for drift and error, better than some of the people maintaining it. He didn't say we were outclassed. He said, we were out-timed. We asked about NTSTK. He went quiet long enough for us to think the line dropped. Then he said, I can't help you with that, and tried to steer back to protocols. We brought him back gently. He took a breath and gave us a boundary. He would confirm the letters exist in a context where timing is an authority, not a suggestion. He wouldn't define them. He wouldn't confirm a program name. He wouldn't say ownership. When we repeated the letters to confirm, he said, don't record that. Again, even though we weren't. Microstory. We asked whether the marker showed up during an exercise. He said, there was an event in the Pacific, then stopped like a hand had landed on his shoulder. He didn't apologize for stopping. He ended the call with a line that made the room colder. If you're smart, you'll talk about mechanisms and leave the names alone. We called back. He didn't pick up. A day later, a different number texted, do not contact this device again. We stepped back and checked his bones. Career timeline matched billets that handle IFF crypto and integration with tactical data links. Open source award citations verified that he'd been in rooms where Mode 5 problems get solved. The jargon fell out of him in the right order, no Wikipedia shine. When we got sloppy with a term, he corrected us without showing off. Credibility, in our experience, sounds like boredom with being right. So what did he actually confirm? Not a clock, a marker, not content, cadence. Low-rate telemetry piggybacking on timing critical channels in a way that suggests the sender cares about phase, not message. He also confirmed a risk calculus we'd been guessing at. The marker didn't look hostile to a system that thinks hostility equals volume. It looked like housekeeping. Systems let housekeeping pass. We asked why insiders won't name the program, but won't deny it exists. He said denial is falsifiable and names are discoverable. Describing behavior is safer. He mapped the internal risk like an engineer. Statements that define intent or ownership trigger oversight, and oversight creates records. Records attract discovery. Discovery puts careers and clearances on the table. But describing a mechanism, we saw timing anomalies. Sounds like troubleshooting, which lives in a corner no one volunteers to audit. Then he gave us the line that bridged the air and the water. If you're seeing the marker in the air picture, look for it in the ocean sonar. Phase likes phase. He said that as if it were the most boring sentence in the world. For him, it was. For us, it opened a door. He hinted that a trial run happened during a Pacific exercise window when multiple sensors, airborne, surface, subsurface, went into maintenance-friendly modes. He called it a clean lab day. We heard dress rehearsal. He wouldn't say where. He wouldn't say when. But he nudged us toward the place where timing matters most and noise kills data. Water. Sonar. Zero cavitation logs that read like fiction, unless you think about phase games that let things cheat, drag, and splash. He ended our last short call with a warning and a pointer. If there's a clock, it's not counting down. It's counting together. So we went to the water. The ocean trial, medium gate theory. We went where clocks hate noise. A Pacific exercise window, not named on paper, but alive in logs. A destroyer's combat system flagged subsurface returns that snapped into alignment with airborne tracks within milliseconds. Not seconds, milliseconds. The kind of timing you only get when two different instruments are listening to the same conductor. On the surface scope, faint skin paints walked a grid. Below, the sonar plotter lit dots that matched those steps, depth shifting like stairs the ocean keeps refusing to admit are there. For context, the earlier Tic-Tac intercept off San Diego was November 2004, and ADIP, the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, formally ran 2007 to 2012. Different eras, same obsession with timing. Sonar crews expect turbulence when anything moves fast underwater. Cavitation sings. This didn't sing. A line in the acoustic log read, "Zero cavitation transitions." That phrase shouldn't exist at the speeds recorded. Yet the waterfalls were clean, smooth bands where you expect chaos, like drag had been accounted for before the ocean had a chance to enforce it. One operator circled the segment and wrote a note he didn't think anyone would see. It felt rehearsed. Thermal imagers on a nearby patrol aircraft pointed down for a sanity check. Usually big moves mean hot spots, waste heat, friction wakes. Instead, the cameras found cold sinks, oval shadows where the water ran cooler, edges crisp as if sketched with a ruler. Energy deficit where there should have been surplus. If you're watching with old assumptions, that's a bug. If you're thinking in timing, it's a tell. Cooling implies phase control, moving energy around the interface instead of through it. Here's where the gate idea stops sounding like science fiction and starts looking like plumbing. The hypothesis that grew in those rooms was simple. Synchronized nodes timing phase transitions between air and water. Not holes, not portals, gates, points where gradients are shaped so the medium stops being the thing that slows you down. Make those points lock to a shared clock, and you can hand an object from one node to the next like a baton, never letting it feel the full drag of either world. Why did the countdown matter here? Because the nodes don't align themselves. To snap underwater acoustics to airborne radar within milliseconds, you need a common reference that all the nodes trust more than their local clocks. That's what the pilot's tone hinted at, an external beat every system could latch to. The carrot pulses he saw, the phase-aligned returns the destroyer logged, the cold sinks stamped on the ocean's skin. They're all what you'd expect if the gates were syncing up to a marker. A sonar chief tried to break the spell with a checklist. He ran through layer depth, salinity gradients, ducting effects, ship self-noise. Each box ticked, each excuse died. He added an addendum he couldn't justify with math. Pattern coherence exceeds environmental stability. Translation? The ocean wobbles. This didn't. Coherence meant control. Control meant someone or something was holding a clock steady across air and water and making both pretend to be easier than they are. Parallel action on the carrier group's ESM racks told the same story from a different angle. Spectrum watchers got a narrow spike that rose and fell below comms chatter, a carrier you'd miss if you weren't bored enough to stare. The spike wasn't message-rich. It was rhythm-rich, cycling through subharmonics at intervals that hinted at a terrestrial anchor. When the spike stepped, the sonar dots stepped. When the spike held, the cold sinks widened like mouths taking one slow breath. We pressed the word gate on people who hate metaphors. A quiet engineer gave us the phrasing he'd use in a lab. Time phase boundary conditioning. If you can shape the boundary and condition it in time, you can change how matter experiences the crossing. You don't need magic. You need precision. GPS birds do it with nanoseconds to keep your maps from drifting into ditches. This felt like GPS with teeth, timing not to locate but to move. Stakes came into focus when the pattern repeated across domains. A submarine's towed array caught the same millisecond matches during a separate training day, different ocean, different participants. The ship's log called it correlated multi-domain ingress. No fireworks, no wakes, just arrivals that ignored seams because the seams had been turned into handrails. The people on watch wrote what humans write when the model won't hold. Recommend maintenance review. Then they went quiet. Back on land, the continuity liaison's term from the Annex notes finally made sense. Temporal deconfliction. If gates are real, you don't just deconflict altitudes and airways. You deconflict time windows so your own assets don't get sliced by a transition they can't see. That's a new kind of safety brief. It also concedes something command hates to admit. If timing is the battle space, whoever owns the clock owns the lanes. One more human moment anchors the math. A junior sonar tech, off shift, wrote 3 words in a personal notebook after the drill. They kept time. He underlined they twice, then crossed it out, then put it back. He didn't know who they were. He knew the feeling you get when multiple instruments click into the same beat. Rehearsal, not curiosity. If there's a clock, someone built it. And if someone feared it, they called a meeting no one will admit happened. The meeting they can't admit, continuity brief. Across the pier, while the sonar team logged those millisecond matches, base leadership got a calendar invite that didn't travel the usual network. Not Outlook, not NIPR. A physical runner delivered slips to 3 offices with a time, a room, and a note. Attendance mandatory. Devices off. The room wasn't the big auditorium with flags. It was a windowless conference space 2 doors down from the emergency ops center, the kind with a phone that doesn't ring unless someone important already knows who's on the other end. They walked in with the posture of people who don't want to write minutes. Wing commander, ops boss, security forces lead. A civilian in a suit with a badge that isn't a badge, no seal, just a raised texture. He introduced himself by role, not name, continuity of government liaison. Everyone else's phones went into a metal tray. The liaison kept his notebook in a printed deck, hole punched, no logos on the title slide. The first words weren't about aircraft or radar. They were about posture. Slide 2 carried a phrase you won't find on recruiting posters. Adaptive posture, NTSTK. Someone in the second row wrote the words verbatim in a bound notebook, the kind issued to staff who still get told to carry paper. We've seen that handwriting in attendee notes before. The same hand drew a small arrow from NTSTK to a margin scribble. Tempo windows. The liaison flipped to a slide that laid out a simple problem with ugly edges. If ingress can synchronize across domains to the microsecond, your normal deconfliction fails. You don't just stack altitudes, you stack time. He didn't define NTSTK. He didn't have to for the room. He used it as a given, a label attached to a posture they were already practicing without the name. We later cross-referenced language from public continuity doctrine, COOP and COG manuals that talk about mission-essential functions and execution under stress. The phrases matched tone, but not terms. Continuity slides say time-critical functions. His said temporal deconfliction. That term appears exactly nowhere in the public binders. It showed up here like a tool already in use. Here's how he framed it without alarming the room. He drew 2 timelines. One was us, base operations, local emergency protocols, air tasking cycles. The other was an external clock that, if real, would slice those cycles into windows where your assets either pass clean or get clipped by something you can't see. The fix, in his words, wasn't heroics. It was choreography. Shift base functions off the seams during windows that matter. Push fuel convoys 20 minutes earlier. Resequence maintenance launches. Harden comms to hold lock when the tone rises. Someone asked the question that always lands in rooms like this. Who owns NTSTK? The liaison didn't answer ownership. He answered responsibility. Treat it as joint, he said, and behave as if you're the weak link. That lands like an insult if you're defensive. In that room, it landed like instruction. He walked through a checklist that looked suspiciously like the aftermath of our pilot's flight. Establish radio silence protocols that can be invoked without invoking panic. Pre-brief code words that mean stop talking and listen, but don't train crews to freeze. Identify grid seams touching your perimeter and ask the utility to show you their timing hardening, without writing down their vulnerabilities. He put up a slide with a list of acronyms that belonged to different fiefdoms, intel, space, cyber, but the verbs were all the same: align, clock, defer. A colonel with artillery roots flagged the word strike, embedded in the acronym. The liaison didn't confirm a definition. He didn't correct it either. He shifted to authorities. Op immediate, he said, moves you into lanes where you can act, and we can defend your actions later. That's legal oxygen. It also means signatures were in play above their pay grades. We've seen COOP decks. They love process maps and recovery phases. This wasn't recovery. This was preemption without firing. The slide titled Adaptive Posture listed actions already live on base. Generator sync checks moved to offset the pilot's countdown time window by half an hour. SATCOM tests run under different chirp rates to see which held when the tone rose. runway lighting systems set to manual control to avoid smart controllers, hunting for a lost reference and tripping dark. None of that proves authorship. All of it concedes a clock. Then the liaison used the phrase we can verify from the notes: temporal deconfliction. He said it as if briefing altitude blocks. If you deconflict time, space follows. He tied it to civilian partners in a way that made the security forces chief scribble a question mark. Your critical paths don't stop at the gate, he said. Your seams are theirs. That's not a line you pull from a war college essay. That's a sheriff's briefing wearing a suit. Why hide this meeting? Because acknowledging the posture concedes hostile intent you can't attribute without starting other clocks, political ones. If you admit you're timing around someone else's beat, you admit you're reacting, not dictating. We asked a participant later what stuck. He said the part where the liaison asked for quiet drills. Move a convoy by 5 minutes for a week and see who notices. Change shift change by 10 and watch your own systems burp. Find the places where time, not access, is the vulnerability. The unanswered question hummed under all of it. Who sets the beat? Intel? Space Force? A joint cell that lives between bad acronyms? The liaison didn't say. He closed with 2 orders of detail we could verify and 1 we couldn't. Verifiable? The term temporal deconfliction appears in the attendee notes alongside taskings to brief utility liaisons and retime maintenance. The part we can't verify? A side comment that the window repeats, said like a weather report for people who know windows move. Everything was about to change when the liaison slid one last page onto the table. A simple calendar with 3 highlighted bands and no legend. He tapped the middle band. Treat these hours like airspace, he said. You don't own them. That was the moment the room understood the game. Not map lines, not fences. Time. The physics problem, timing without a boom. While that calendar sat on the table, the pilots were wrestling with a question their jets couldn't answer. How do you push air aside at 550 knots, change vector on a dime, and not leave a shock wave or a heat bloom big enough to blind sensors? The tic-tac stories gave us the shape. The tapes we've heard gave us the silence. The only way to make both true is to stop treating motion as a brute force shove and start treating it as timing. Get this straight. If you change your speed through air the usual way, you dump energy into the medium. That makes heat, wakes, and bangs. But if you shape the medium in front of you, you don't hit it. You invite it to move. That language sounds mystical until you remember every GPS receiver in your pocket already lives on timing. Satellites live and die by nanoseconds. Miss the beat and your blue dot walks through walls. Keep the beat and your car finds a driveway. The craft we're talking about looked like they were riding envelopes, controlled gradients in space that let them ramp pressure and density without hammering through it. In lab terms, think gradient envelopes that translate a craft's front end into a gentle slope and its tail into a smooth handoff. You don't need exotic material to dream that up. You need precise phase control of whatever field is doing the heavy lifting, electromagnetic, gravitational, or something that couples to both. If you've got that, you don't just move the craft. You move the medium's willingness to resist. Now tie 5 of those envelopes together. If each craft carries its own little world, they still have to agree on when now is. That's where the countdown starts making sense. Not as a pilot's timer, but as a phase lock reference distributed across nodes. A countdown is a human face on a physics problem. Align your gradients to a common epoch, then step your transitions in lock. The caret pulses on our pilot's radar. That's what shared time looks like when a display tries to tell a human what the machine already knows. Synchronizing gradient envelopes across multiple craft isn't a nice to have. It's the only way you avoid the loud part. If one envelope slips, the air doesn't just complain, it peels. That's your boom. Phase lock them, and you move in a flock that never fights itself. Labs already chase baby versions of this. Atomic clocks discipline satellite constellations, so they don't saw themselves in half with time drift. Laser interferometers cancel noise by beating light against light. Engineers whisper about distributed apertures, where many small emitters act like one big one if their phase is tight enough. So picture 5 nodes acting like a distributed field generator. If their timing is coherent, the mass, you feel, is not just the crafts. It's the way the field drapes across the formation. That's how you get sustained acceleration without heat signatures that scream. The energy is still there. It's just guided through a path with fewer opportunities to spill. A radar sees a vector. A thermal's camera sees a deficit. Humans see nothing, then gone. Here's where the tone matters. A phase lock loop needs a reference. You inject a clean carrier into a noisy band, then let every node's loop chase it until lock. When the loop is locked, the world gets quiet. That's what the pilot heard creeping into his intercom, what the destroyer's ESM racks saw as a skinny spike under the chatter. It's housekeeping, sure, but it's housekeeping with authority. If you can phase lock, you can mass on target to the microsecond. Look at the knock-on effects. If you own the microsecond geometry bows, you can press 5 ingress lanes through the same seam without the lanes jostling. You can time a transition at the exact instant a grid controller's phase angle swings past a threshold, nudging a smart device to chase a phantom correction. You can hit a repeater farm's PLL when it's most vulnerable to a nudge and watch 2 counties lose sync without a cyber alert. That's not fireworks. That's paralysis. Lab analogs are all over the place, hiding in plain sight. Phased array radars steer beams without moving antennas by changing phase across elements. GPS satellites carry rubidium and cesium references that fight drift so hard they correct relativity. In low Earth orbit, constellations share timing to crosslink without cooking each other. None of that makes a tic-tac. All of it teaches the same lesson. Precision buys you leverage that bulk can't. If you squint at the Annex language, temporal deconfliction, you see the concession baked in. They weren't worried about altitude blocks first. They were worried about windows. If your adversary can place the quiet part of their crossing in your busy second, your procedures turn into tripwires. Deconflict time and space follows. Missed time and space breaks you. And here's the quiet terror tucked under the science. A first strike, if it ever comes, isn't a flash on the horizon. It's a synchronized window where seams lose their grip. You don't hear an explosion. You hear nothing at all, because your clocks slip a fraction, your sensors agree with the lie, and your procedures keep you from yelling when you should. That pilot didn't see a countdown to impact. He saw a lock-in moment, the beat where 5 envelopes became 1 hand. That's why they hit it. Not because of what he saw, but because of what it meant. We weren't outgunned. We were out-timed. The pilot's last tape, 3 words that froze the room. We didn't get the tape from a leak site. We got it from a kitchen drawer. His brother slid the thumb drive across the table like it was hot. He said, if anyone asks, you never heard it from me. The file wasn't long, 19 minutes of cockpit audio, synced to flight data. It started boring. Checks. Cross-checks. The kind of calm that makes you trust a voice you've never met. 5 minutes in, the cadence changed. The breath got tighter, not stressed, focused. You could hear the tactile switches like coins on glass. Then a low murmur rode the intercom floor, a hum you'd miss on laptop speakers. He didn't mention the tone. He called his wingman to tighten, then said 3 words that landed like a dropped wrench. Marker went active. He didn't say countdown. He didn't say timer. Marker. Same word the liaison used behind a closed door. Same concept the analyst refused to call a clock. The room went still when we played it the first time. The second time, somebody reached for the volume dial and didn't touch it. On the tape, those 3 words were followed by a quiet we would only recognize later, systems giving way to rhythm. The instruments told their own story. RPM stable, fuel flow nominal, no caution lights. But the recording caught data bursts ticking faster, as if housekeeping traffic were picking up its pace. The SA page clicked through ranges without an explicit command. He didn't panic. He did what pilots do when their world narrows, narrate the essentials. 5 unknowns holding geometry. Carrots pulsing. Stand by. Then the hum stepped up a notch, like a carrier tone on a scope tightening its belt. Half a minute later, controls clicked. His hand must have hovered over the master arm, a reflex our analyst warned us to ignore. He toggled something and dismissed it with a breath. His wingman came back with a normal voice about fuel state, then paused and asked, "You hearing that?" Led said, "Negative on anomalies." "Maintain." Translation, "I hear it. Don't say it on the net." At T00:01:12 on the HUD, the tape caught a faint chirp, a beat under the hum, repeating at a spacing we'd heard in that Midwest controller's pen taps. 90 seconds, 60:45. It wasn't Morse. It wasn't data. It was cadence. You could watch the digits roll and hear the rises almost, but not exactly match. We looped it. The offsets were consistent by a hair, the kind of delta you'd see if the reference were external and the system were chasing it. Then the carrier tone pushed louder without ever getting loud. "Radios." crackled once, a half-syllable from range, and cut, like a limiter clamped down. He stayed ahead of it. Negative comms interference. Continuing hold. Calm, but he pitched his words on the low end, a trick to keep a recorder from saturating. The vector caret over the western node pulsed twice as fast. He called pulses accelerating. He didn't add marker, as if naming it would feed it. The last 10 seconds were the longest. He shifted in the seat, harness biting, gloves suddenly too tight, and the breath in his mask changed from steady to measured. You could hear how he kept the count by not counting. He checked position, altitude, and one word that didn't belong in that airspace. Seam. He said it like a reminder, like a piece of training someone had tried to erase. 10. He eased pressure on the stick, forearms buzzing like they'd found a frequency the ear couldn't. 9. The hum gained a halo, sidebands brushing the edge of hearing. 8. His jaw clicked once. He swallowed hard to clear a pressure that wasn't altitude. 7. The kneeboard scratched as his leg tremored, a tiny stutter he caught and pinned. 6. The cockpit mic picked up a micro vibration in the rails or the canopy, or maybe just the recorder's casing. 5. He tightened his core the way you do before turbulence hits. 4. His voice dropped half a step. Maintain. 3. Everything narrowed, and we mean everything. The audio didn't mute, it tunneled, like the bandwidth of his world had been squeezed to a pipe the size of a pencil. Somewhere inside that squeeze, a carrier climbed half a semitone and held. He exhaled once, slow, and then, low enough the recorder almost missed it, he said what professionals say when they know the line just moved. We're committed. The frame freeze we told you about shows up at that exact instant. The HUD caught T00:00:03. The audio kept rolling. No warning horns, no master caution choir, no boom. Just the tone and the slow, careful way a human breathes when he knows any sudden input will show up on a graph forever. In that beat, he understood it wasn't a timer, it was a lock. A threshold crossed. You don't go back through it. Then, empty. The hum drained down. The radio hiss came back like a door opening. He didn't exclaim. He said 2 words aircrews use when the story can only get you in trouble. Situation normal. The words were steady. The pulse behind them wasn't. The aftermath wasn't on the tape. It was in the paperwork his family didn't show us, and the details his brother delivered without drama. Reassigned to a desk within a week. Medical eval coded situational, which is a way to say we have to check the boxes without accusing a man of cracking. He kept flying. He just didn't keep intercepting. The coffee he liked went untouched in the squadron kitchen. People noticed without asking. He told his brother one thing before he closed the subject for good. Watch the grid. Not the sky. The grid. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The 3 words he put on tape had already done the real work. Marker when active. The analyst would later call it a synchronization marker. The contractor emails would call it non-cooperative synchronization. The Annex would dress it up in countdown telemetry. The voice in the cockpit made it human. One last detail made the room colder the 3rd time we played it. Embedded in the bleed of that tone, our audio guy found a faint second beat, a subharmonic stepping short of the carrier like a shadow. We'd seen that offset before in another dataset. On the tape, it rode along quietly, and then when the frame froze, it landed. That's why the next thing we did wasn't call the pilot. It was run the tone. The tone analysis, a clock hidden in noise. We started with the hum nobody wanted to name and did the stubborn thing. Pulled it apart until it either fell into pieces or into place. First pass was simple. Strip the voice, ignore obvious radio chatter, and listen for anything steady under the hiss. Beneath the pilot's breath and cockpit noise, a narrow, stable line stood up. Too thin to carry a message. Steady enough to carry meaning. Quick primer so the terms land. Mode 5 IFF is a secure friend or foe handshake that lets aircraft and ships prove they're friendly by answering a timing-precise challenge. When timing is off, trust is off. 2 independent labs took the tape. Instead of burying you in math terms, here's what they did in plain English. They looked for repeating patterns and steady beats hiding under noise, the way a musician finds the metronome in a busy room. Both found the same thing, faint notes, stacked under the main tone at exact fractions of a day. Not close, exact. When we lined those fractions up against Earth's rotation, they matched down to a ridiculous number of decimal places. Earth's day is the most honest clock we have. Random noise doesn't lock to that. Intentional signals do. Then we found something else, tiny shoulders next to the main line, offset by a gap that stayed the same across the pilot's tape and a separate recording from a hobbyist 10 states away, months later. That offset let us translate the frequency gap into time, then into geography. The pins it dropped didn't land on cities. They landed on seams, grid handoffs, repeater spines, fuel junctions, water control nodes. The boring choke points that keep everything moving. Officials called it an artifact. We chased the usual suspects. If it were a recorder flaw, it wouldn't repeat across different devices and places. If it were a quirk of how you look at the data, the gap would wander when you change how you look. It didn't. If it were power line hum, the stack would sit on 50/60th Hertz steps, not fractions of the planet's spin. It didn't. Artifacts don't map infrastructure. We put the pilot's shadow beat under a simpler lens. It lagged the main tone by a constant amount, and then, at the exact instant the HUD froze at T00:00:03, it snapped into perfect alignment, like a radio finally catching a station. If you've tuned a dial, you know the click. On the tape he said, marker when active. The behavior says, reference acquired. From there, the model is straightforward. Imagine a master clock quietly ticking. Other systems hear it, line themselves up, and move together on that beat. The faint notes under the main tone carry the cadence. The tiny offsets help everyone agree on where and when. That's how 5 airborne tracks and 2 underwater returns could step in sync within milliseconds. We checked the tone against nights when the chessboard lattices appeared on scopes. The geography matched in places we hadn't published, right down to a seam a lineman later described as the spot where 2 regions argue twice a day. Over months, the little offset tightened there, like someone tuning in a noisy room. We didn't stop at audio. A contractor shared a snapshot from a satellite communications test. Different band, different gear, but a tiny ripple rode its timing trace at the same slow cadence we heard in the cockpit. The lab, blinded to our story, circled it and wrote housekeeping. We wrote clock. One more plain language anchor. Phaser measurement units, PMUs, are grid sensors that measure the grid's heartbeat, voltage, and the exact timing of the 60 Hz wave, so different regions can agree on what now is. They matter because if 2 regions disagree on that timing, protection systems trip, and power moves the wrong way or not at all. After the tone nights, utilities quietly bought PMUs and better local clocks, so they could hold their own timing if the outside reference got strange. We tested weather and weird propagation too. Reflections inducting smear and drift. Our line sharpened and held while the weather wandered. The clincher? Those faint notes stepped with Earth rotation fractions that even adjusted correctly when we accounted for leap seconds. Equipment quirks don't respect leap seconds. Clocks do. Here's the bottom line without the math gloss. A quiet tone sat under the noise. Beneath it were fainter tones at precise slices of a day. That should not happen by accident. The tiny gap next to the main line stayed the same across miles and months, and when converted, pointed to the same kinds of bottlenecks over and over. Recent captures show that gap getting tighter, like a hand getting steadier on a dial. We'll publish the methods so you can check us. But the pattern is already doing the talking across devices, months, and distances. Artifacts don't do that. Intent does. And if there's a clock running under the room, it's not waiting for permission. The contractor trail, emails, NDAs, and a red flag. Here's the door that opened by accident. A mid-tier defense contractor put out a request for quotes on a radar upgrade. Routine, boring, the kind of PDF nobody reads past page 3. But buried in the technical annex, a line item asked for temporal alignment modules with tolerance specs tighter than anything you'd need for a weather filter. Not time-aligned, temporal alignment. The wording wasn't a typo. It pulled a handful of subcontractors into a discussion they thought was about clocks and learned wasn't, not exactly. We got the thread because someone CC'd a personal account by mistake and then tried to claw it back with a recall request that made us pay attention. The chain wasn't sensational. It was better. Engineers speaking to engineers. The quiet confidence of people who measure twice and still check the micrometer. One email from a senior systems integrator asked whether the external reference discipline would be cooperative or potentially contested. The reply was 2 words and a period. Non-cooperative. That phrase matched what our annex called non-cooperative unknowns and what the insider whispered as non-cooperative synchronization. The modules weren't meant to sync friendlies. They were meant to hold lock against a signal that didn't care if you wanted it. The hardware spec called for phase-locked loops with rapid reacquisition after forced unlock, and an anti-hump profile designed to prevent a controller from chasing a false reference. That's not a radar filter. That's a metronome with attitude. Then came the NDA addendum. Standard NDAs read like warmed over oatmeal. Don't disclose trade secrets, don't post screenshots, don't talk to press. This one had a subheading we've never seen: prohibited nomenclature. Under it, a bullet that forbid naming NTSTK in any internal communications, even between cleared parties. Not in emails, not in tickets, not in slide decks. The guidance substituted an anodyne phrase, non-cooperative synchronization effort, and warned that misuse would trigger program separation. You don't hide a code name in an NDA unless saying it out loud causes alarms to ring in rooms you don't visit. Cross-company footprints showed the same language popping up in unrelated bids, 3 primes, different verticals, all with tiny clauses about temporal alignment under contested reference. A power systems vendor used the exact phrase while sourcing GPS-disciplined oscillators hardened against spoofing. A comms integrator asked for reference arbitration logic that could gracefully ignore the strongest signal if its cadence smelled wrong. Nobody wrote UAP. They wrote like they were trying to keep their gear from falling in love with a beat they didn't own. Microstory inside the big one. An engineer with 10 years on phased arrays wrote a progress note at 2:11 a.m. PLL holding under injected cadence, spur reduction acceptable. 2 days later, his manager asked him to delete archived test logs to consolidate storage before a joint review. He refused. The next morning, his badging didn't work. He resigned a week later and slid us a personal copy of the note, stripped of timestamps, but he couldn't strip the cadence figures we'd already seen in the pilot's tone. He never said NTSTK. He didn't have to. Meanwhile, procurement timelines told a story travel posters won't. A quiet recall notice went out to field offices from 1 prime, instructing techs to pull and quarantine a batch of alignment modules. The reason fielded in the notice was environmental intolerance. That's code for, it behaved in the real world in a way we didn't predict. The effective date on the recall matched the week of our pilot's flight to the day. We checked the timestamp against the Annex date in the copier shadow. They kissed. We asked for comment. We got the corporate version of go away. We continuously improve our products. Fair. But independent techs we trust described a different vibe. A regional service lead said he was told to bring every module back in person. No shipping, no couriers, no tracking numbers visible in public systems. On May 24, 2019, he drove 6 hours with a locked Pelican case and a signature sheet that requested he initial next to a line about temporal susceptibility. He'd never seen the word in that context. He initialed anyway. Across town, a different contractor revised an installation manual to add a section on reference arbitration. The diagram showed a block labeled external discipline, feeding a voting logic gate with 2 other references, local GPS and oven-controlled crystal. The big arrow labeled non-cooperative environment pointed at the external input with a note. Do not assume benevolence. Engineers don't write that unless someone burned them. The firmware changelog added a line, reduce loop bandwidth during cadence anomalies. That's not weather. A procurement lawyer we know glanced at the NDA addendum and shrugged at the boilerplate. Then she tapped the prohibited nomenclature clause and said, that's not for court, that's for search. If you can't write NTSTK in an email, discovery bots can't find it. If discovery bots can't find it, oversight staff can't stumble into it. You still build the thing. You just blindfold your own paper trail. We tracked purchase orders across 3 primes and saw one more tell. Deliveries that should have gone to test labs on base got rerouted to a joint validation cell with an innocuous address that resolves to a contractor facility shared by space, cyber, and electronic warfare teams. In receipt logs, a stamp we've seen on unrelated coupe gear showed up, adaptive posture. Different domain, same phrase. The people building counterclocks were being told to time around a beat they weren't allowed to name. One PO trail explicitly referenced MISO and SPP interface testing as an end-use environment, anchoring the work to real seams. Then came the red flag that tied our pilots' sky to their benches. A second recall notice surfaced, narrower and sharper. Dated May 20th, 2019, it referenced field anomaly coincident with T00:00 events, and instructed removal of version 3.4 modules only, leaving 3.3 and 3.5 in place. The date stamp on the notice matched the countdown flight. It didn't say countdown. It didn't have to. They pulled the exact boxes that might have chased the wrong marker at the exact moment a pilot said, "Marker when active." If they recalled it, they knew it worked. Or worse, they knew it worked for someone else. The countermeasure that failed, silent response. By the time the recall vans were moving, a small team in a windowless lab thought they had an answer. Don't fight the thing head-on, step it off the beat. They called it an asynchronous scatter jammer, a polite name for a timing wrench. Instead of shouting, it would whisper wrong time, microperturbations injected across bands, nudging loops to hunt and never quite lock. On paper, it looked clean. In a simulator, foreign loops drifted and sulked. In the readiness board, someone stamped QRT, quick reaction test, and told a flight to take it to sea. Deployment logs read like checkbox poetry. Power-up sequence nominal. Reference oscillators within spec. Scatter profiles loaded, wide, narrow, randomized dither. A destroyer lit the package and watched its own clocks hold while the jammer bled tiny lies into the air. The first report came back with the phrase you write when you want to win. Effects observed. A scope smear, a hiccup in a beat, a pause in a lattice segment. They filed success claim because the tool did something. The problem? What it did wasn't what they needed. Field observations told a colder story. The incursions didn't slow. They multiplied. The nets that had been neat rectangles started to curve, bowing around the scatter like a river around a rock. Timing is elastic if you can see the current. The jammer added ripples. The formation surfed them. A controller wrote, increased coordination post-countermeasure, then crossed out post and wrote during. If you give a metronome a wobble and it can hear you, you've given it a dance step. The human angle slid into a plain journal entry. An air defense officer scribbled after a midnight shift. We're swatting timing, not the hand. He'd watched the carrots keep pace while the scatter profiles stepped. He wasn't seeing brute force. He was seeing arbitration. The other side didn't pick the strongest signal. It picked the right one. Our scatter just made wrong ones more interesting. The marker ignored them and brought everyone else along. Why did it fail? Because the countermeasure assumed the clock lived in the same fabric our instruments do. It tried to jam a reference as if it were just another transmission. But you can't jam a clock embedded in the measuring stick. If the beat couples into the loops that tell devices what time is, scattering on top is graffiti on the glass. The watch face gets fuzzy. The gears keep perfect time under it. Operators saw their displays wobble while the incursions tightened. That's a nasty inversion. Your picture degrades while their picture sharpens. Meanwhile, the lab's success memo boomeranged back with questions editing couldn't soften. Why did fielded timing hardening modules enter protect mode more often with scatter active? Why did SATCOM chirps recover faster when the jammer went quiet? The patched firmware that was supposed to reduce loop bandwidth during anomalies did its job by refusing to chase our own injected wobble. The gear saved itself from us. The formation didn't need saving. Across services, language shifted in public. Briefings leaned on safe terms, unusual air activity, training area anomalies, degraded weather picture, while internal alerts turned redder and shorter. Instead of long sitreps, units got pings, window expected, reduced dependence on external discipline. Local, oscillators only. That's not a victory lap. That's buying time. Scatter sorties continued, tweaked and retuned, mostly to prove we were doing something. Inside, the tone hardened, don't count on this. A microstory from a coastal radar site showed how the field learned where not to lean. On a foggy night, the chief flipped scatter on when a lattice brushed the range boundary. The blob bent, then reformed tighter. He killed scatter and watched subtracks separate just enough for his software to declare them distinct. The line he wrote in his log would never make a press release. Better without us. He stopped flipping the switch unless he needed to show compliance. Yet the program didn't die. It morphed. Scatter became a probe, not a shield. Teams started using it to measure how the marker responded under stress, timing the lag between our wobble and their correction. The lag shrank over weeks, milliseconds shaved like a disciplined drill. That taught a quiet lesson no one wanted to say aloud. Someone was learning from us faster than we were learning from them. Policy followed fear. Public-facing language softened, no talk of hostile intent, no acronyms in daylight, while procurement surged for timing-hardened systems. reference arbitration, and holdover robustness. Internally, alerts escalated from suggestion to instruction, reschedule maintenance away from expected windows, pre-stage analog fallbacks, practice radio silence without freezing decision-making. A colonel put it plain to his staff: treat silence as a tactic, not a panic. Every mission planner knows the cruel math. You can hold the fort with workarounds for a while. You can't win a timing fight by pretending it's still about power. The scatter program bought days, sometimes hours, breathing room to brief utilities, to check generator syncs, to tape over the smart controller that wanted to chase a ghost beat. It never bought control. The people closest to the screen started carrying notebooks again, pencils scratching intervals when printers stopped trusting their own clocks. Which brings us back to the Annex, because the failure forced a confession between the lines. If your countermeasure makes the picture worse, you stop waving the picture around. You classify the silence and call it posture. You tell crews, we're not deaf, we're disciplined. And you write one line in a restricted annex that carries the weight of a door closing. NTSTK invoked. Countdown telemetry observed, op immediate. The annex decoded. NTSTK finally. We didn't crack NTSTK with a whistleblower or a magic binder. We did it the slow way, by laying acronyms next to each other until the patterns stopped being shy. Classified programs love families. They reuse stems, suffixes, and cadence. Sitrep, JTF, opimd. When a new child shows up, it usually wears the family name. Start with the bones. In annexes we could verify, strike-enabling kits used a template, mission domain plus action plus kit. JSEK, Joint Sensor Exploitation Kit. Turk, non-traditional ISR kit. That construction shows up across offices that pretend they don't talk. NTSTK fits the mold, non-dash, strike kit. The N and the K behave. The S in the middle wears a heavier weight. We built a list of plausible middles, signature, synchronization systems, and tested each against the behavior we'd already documented. Non-terrestrial strike kit is the one that scared everyone who read it out loud. It implied ownership we can't prove. It also matched a small detail. In two separate contractor specs, terrestrial was capitalized when it meant ground systems, lowercase when it meant literally dirt. Here, the N and the T carried title case weight in a way the grammar nerds in cleared rooms used to signal category, not component. We labeled it as a theory and kept digging. Then a small tell we almost missed. An old glossary slip from a joint electronic warfare working group used non-cooperative synchronization as a term of art, not a flowery phrase. The initialism they sketched next to it during a whiteboard session was NCS. Not helpful until a later slide paired NCS with strike windows, using strike as a noun, not a verb. The pairing suggested strike isn't fireworks. It's timing, getting assets across a seam during the right second. NTSTK, in that light, reads like a kit for exploiting non-terrestrial references to open strike windows. Still theory, but tighter. We cross-checked with public doctrine because sometimes daylight documents carry shadows. Continuity binders talk about mission essential functions and time-critical execution. Airspace control pubs mention deconfliction, never temporal. Yet a Space Force handbook footnote, easy to skim past, defined temporal deconfliction as a scheduling discipline for assets under constrained windows. No acronym, no classification stamp, just a seed that matched the liaison slide and our annex note. Space owns time and practice. If anyone would build a kit to manage contested reference, they'd have a hand on it. We went back to insiders and asked for letters, not names. Two separate people, different services, different decades, confirmed NTSTK exists as a string in tasking. Neither gave us a glossary. Both flinched when we suggested definitions. One said, treat the S as synchronization when you're talking about mechanics, as strike when you're talking about authorities. That split matters. It says the kit's value is timing, the kit's consequence is action. Again, concept, not confirmation. And because people will ask, yes, this sits in the same longer arc where ADIP formally ran 2007 to 2012, and the November 2004 Tic-Tac intercept set the modern template for how we talk about these flights. Why does the wording matter? Because strike moves you across legal lines. Call it sensing, and you get Title 50. Call it strike, and you're holding Title 10 in one hand and lawyers in the other. The annex line that invoked op immediate likely walked those corridors in real time. The presence of strike in the acronym, if that's what it is, explains the urgency and the silence. Admit strike, even as posture, and you concede hostile intent has been weighed, not hypothesized. We anchored our theory against something we could measure. Acronym morphology across known programs. Programs tied to timing and reference discipline loved T's and K's, toolkit, kit, kernel. Programs tied to non-cooperative environments loved N's, non-cooperative, non-traditional. When we ran NTSTK through that lens, the odds favored a kit-class toolkit operating in a non-cooperative timing context. Non-terrestrial still sits as the most dangerous expansion because it implies the reference you're disciplining against isn't ground-based. If the clock you're respecting lives off-planet or off-infrastructure, you've admitted a lot without saying who. Caution is a requirement, not a flourish. We stamped every slide we built with theory where theory lived. We will not claim a definition we can't verify. What we will assert, because we can show the edges, is this. NTSTK appears in restricted annexes associated with temporal deconfliction, invoked alongside countdown telemetry, and woven through contractor work that hardens systems against non-cooperative synchronization. It acts like a kit that handles timing under pressure. Whether the T is terrestrial, transdomain, or something those rooms coined to keep outsiders guessing, the behavior is the same. Then there's the line that locks the doors. The same Annex thread that carried NTSTK includes a timestamp that resolves to T00:00 on a date we can anchor to a drill. The copier shadow gave us enough to match a weekend when the public story blamed a geomagnetic ripple for regional grid burps. Our overlays say the window aligned instead with a cadence snap we'd mapped months earlier. Afterward, procurement surged for timing-hardened modules. Utilities got quiet site visits. Adaptive posture slid into receipts. If it was a drill, it wasn't ours alone. We pressed one insider on that date. He didn't confirm. He said, that weekend changed the questions people were allowed to ask. That's as much confession as you get without initials. If NTSTK framed those questions, it did so because timing stopped being an engineering concern and became an operational art. You don't fix art with a patch. You train around it. You rename silence as discipline. You write op immediate on a page you'll never read in sunlight. So we circle back to the only honest landing. NTSTK's letters are real. Their exact expansion isn't something we can claim without proof. But the kit, whatever its full name, sits at the junction of synchronization and strike, of physics and authority. And the annex that invoked it tied those letters to a zero on a clock we've now heard, seen, and mapped. The date lines up with a blackout. The window repeats. And the beat, whether terrestrial or not, keeps time. The blackout weekend, a dress rehearsal. 3 months after the pilot's tape, a weekend rolled in with the wrong kind of quiet. October 28th to 29th, 2023. Forecasts flagged heightened auroras. Space weather advisories went up, G2 watch, maybe G3. Utilities in Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana briefed crews to expect nuisance alarms. By Friday night, the sky lit up pretty over counties that normally don't get a show. Phones pointed up. Meanwhile, down in the racks, controllers watched clocks breathe in ways they didn't like. The official line landed fast, geomagnetic disturbance, voltage swings. Transformer protection got jumpy, but the timing stuttered. The biggest swings hit hours off the predicted peak. At Great River Energy's control center in Minnesota, a log noted phase angle drift at 213 local that didn't match the magnetometer spike until 407. If the sun was the culprit, the storm forgot its entrance cues. Get this, UAP reports spiked inside that window across those 3 states, not as lights, but as radar oddities. Civilian. Hobbyists running ADSB receivers near Fargo, North Dakota, Billings, Montana, and Moorhead, Minnesota saw ghosts that never squawked, never resolved, and moved like a ring tightening. One wrote, targets flared, aligned, then vanished, like a mouth closing. The ring touched 3 grids seems we'd already mapped. The sideband delta from the tone analysis pointed there months before. The ghosts chose the same places. Emergency comms never fully died. They thinned. Dispatch centers fell back to line of sight in select counties without saying why. A sheriff told a volunteer to use simplex, repeaters are cranky, which is how you talk when the network's heartbeat isn't yours. In one valley, hospital pagers lagged 7 seconds behind the console tones. Not a failure. A slip. That's all it takes when time is the thread. On the radar forums, someone posted a screen capture from a coastal site showing returns in a ring at the same altitude, No weather sweep would generate that clean. He added a second frame 5 minutes later. The ring had contracted and then gone. The thread got scolded into silence by a moderator muttering about exercise clutter. The timestamps lined up with the phase drift in a regional control room's log scribbles we saw later in a pizza box lid. Nobody meant to make a record. They did anyway. Saturday morning, a regional grid operator filed a routine incident report with an odd adjective. Frequency excursions non-periodic. Except the excursions weren't non-periodic. They were periodic to a cadence only the tone watchers would recognize. A lab overlay we ran later showed the same subharmonic intervals from the pilot's tape, writing the event logs like a watermark. That's not how space weather behaves. That's how a beat imposes itself on a system hunting for a reference. We called the utility PR office and got what you'd expect. Space weather chatter, protective trips, nothing to see. But procurement boards don't lie for PR. The following week, bids popped for timing-hardened phaser measurement units and disciplined oscillators with better holdover, delivered in a hurry. A quiet set of site visits rolled into substation yards conducted by people who don't wear lineman boots. They asked about GPS dependencies and reference arbitration, then left without stickers on clipboards. At a county EOC, a volunteer snapped a photo of a whiteboard. SATCOM. Holdover only 030, Los Primary. Someone added test LMR with GPS off and drew a sad face. That's a drill you run when you're afraid an external beat can walk your repeater farms off their footing. It's not space weather readiness. It's timing discipline under pressure. Meanwhile, on VHF, a ham radio net that never talks about UAP used the word tone 3 times without knowing why. One op said, "Hear that slow rise? Ignore it." His friend responded, "Copy, frequency holds." That exchange lived in a recording posted for training, then yanked down. We pulled the audio. Buried under voice, that same ridge sat where it always does, sidebands whispering the same delta. Different gear, different night, same drum. Sunday evening, lights stabilized. The auroras dimmed. Official accounts settled into the story they wanted. Minor storm, minor hiccups resolved. But in a utility's internal after-action, one line jumped out. Timing discrepancies observed during low geomagnetic indices. That's a bureaucratic way to say the sun didn't cause what scared us. And later that month, the same utility's purchase order used a phrase lifted from the liaison's deck. Adaptive posture, temporal deconfliction coordination with state partners. We went back to the ring. Civilian radar hobbyists hate being told to shut up. 2 mailed us raw I/Q captures from their SDR rigs covering the window. We ran them blind through a lab that doesn't care about stories. The lab found a narrow carrier rising and falling under the usual clutter, then flagged subharmonics at fractional Earth rotation intervals. They highlighted a consistent offset that mapped to the same 3 seams. Different antennas, different counties, same offsets. The lab's note read, odd, repeatable. We wrote, practiced. Does this prove authorship? No. It proves pattern. A pattern where a predicted solar event became the blanket under which a different timing regime slipped in, touched the seams, and left with no fireworks. In the aftermath, procurements shifted toward hardened clocks and arbitration logic. Comms drilled Los fallbacks. Slides in quiet rooms said temporal deconfliction. The drill, if it was one, didn't belong to us alone. The stakes are simple and ugly. If someone can step your clocks when the sky gives you cover, they can do it when it doesn't. A first strike won't look like an explosion. It will look like a weekend the lights flickered for no good reason, and afterward everyone bought better metronomes. We're not saying the sun didn't shine. We're saying somebody else kept time. The target map, not bases, bottlenecks. So what was the target? Not the places that make headlines. The places that make everything else work. When we laid the sideband delta longitudes over a clean map, no cities, no bases, just infrastructure, the pins didn't fall on runways or command bunkers. They fell on seams, the big interconnect switches where one grid hands frequency to another, the fuel junctions where pipeline networks cross and meter each other, the dull buildings where fiber trunks split into a dozen counties, the river gates that meter water to crops and cities without anyone ever thanking the operator on duty. We started with power because the pilot said grid, and the tone's offsets didn't argue. The deltas tracked along the seams operators actually name. MESO, SPP interfaces in the plains, WECC ties on the California, Oregon intertie, and PJM, NYSO seams near Ramapo. Overlay the cadence pins, and you get a constellation of boring you can't live without. A pin sat a mile off a substation that feeds a phaser measurement unit farm. Gear that tells operators whether two regions agree on what 60 Hz means. If you seize that agreement for 60 seconds, you don't need to blow a transformer. You let two smart controllers talk past each other and watch human hands scramble to reassert who's in charge. Fuel was worse because it hides. The pins hug pump stations that look like farm equipment to anyone passing at 70 miles an hour. One offset lined with a pressure-regulating node on the Keystone Corridor near York County, Nebraska, that balances eastbound and southbound flows. Map the cadence to valve actuation cycles, and you get a window where a nudge could force a safety shut-in. No explosion, no plume, just a region that runs without diesel for a day, which means the trucks don't show up, which means your grocery warehouse misses a turn, which means your hospital burns through its buffer, which means the story gets told by a nurse trying to swap out a generator at 2 in the morning. Data seams made us angrier because they're the ones we pretend don't exist. You can punch fiber and it heals by rerouting. But the meet me rooms where half a state's traffic changes hands? Those live on clocking. The pins matched longitudes of unmarked facilities where carriers share timing references, so packets don't wander. Think carrier hotels in Minneapolis's 511, 11th Avenue South Corridor, and a low-slung meet near Fargo's 19th Avenue North. One facility manager, off the record, admitted they ran a timing open house the week after the blackout weekend. Every provider came with a newer reference and a red face. Nobody put out a press release. Everyone quietly replaced a box with another box and called it an upgrade. Water control was a cold jolt. The cadence flags kissed the spillway controllers at 2 river choke points where agricultural districts share a pulse. A Missouri River control gate near Garrison Dam, ND, and a Red River structure near Fargo, Moorhead. Those gates don't open on vibes. They open on schedules and thresholds that, in the modern world, depend on clocks to keep flood control and irrigation from stepping on each other. One delta fell within a bend where an old analog governor had been replaced 3 years earlier by a digital controller for reliability. The county carried on. The seam got easier to nudge. We checked ourselves for pareidolia. We randomized pin sets and tried to force fits. The randoms missed seams and landed on fields. The cadence-derived pins kept finding not here, but here, yards away from signage, right on the timing cores. To make sure it wasn't a cartographer's bias, we took the offsets to a lineman who's never heard our show. He studied the printout, jabbed a finger at 2 crossings, and grunted. If you lose these 2 at once, you don't shed load, you shed control. He said it like he'd had the dream. Then he told us the story he doesn't tell at barbecues. He was on a storm crew when 2 regions drifted just enough to start arguing. He saw voltage stay inside limits while frequency walked on in. His SCADA kept painting green. His radios lagged. He called a friend in the other region by cell because his trunked handset wouldn't hold a talk group. We were both fine until we weren't, he said. Hit 3 seams at once and watch how fast everyone's fingers turned to thumbs. He laughed once, a sound that didn't find joy. You don't need to hit a plant. You hit where 2 bosses shake hands. Back to the pilot. The coordinates on his HUD, the ones that froze at T00:00:03, didn't track a city or an airfield. They laid over a node near Sidney, Montana, where transmission responsibility shifts at the Montana, North Dakota seam on a 230 kV intertie, and a gas pipeline skirts the same corridor. A fiber hut hides in the trees nearby with a generator the size of a pickup. If you control the seams, you don't conquer a place. You steal the rhythm of how it feeds itself. Then you leave and let human hands argue their way back to normal. We traced the deltas across months and watched something subtle. The offsets narrowed around a handful of pins, as if a tuner was refining a station in a noisy room. A fuel junction in the plains. A data meet in a low, dirty building near railroad tracks. A water gate no one photographs because it just sits there. The narrowing wasn't dramatic. It was patient. The kind of patience you bring to a rehearsal cycle where the first show is the one you don't announce. Here's the split too many people miss. Bases look like targets. Seams are targets. If you paralyze seams, the bases become museums. Jets sit with fuel and no orders because the orders don't route. Trucks idle on ramps because the card readers can't check a clock. Hospitals run on generators in neighborhoods that still have streetlights because a timing controller thinks it's helping. The power company says load balancing. Your fridge says warm milk. And the ugliest line we wrote on our board came from the map itself. One seam carries more weight than the rest. The place where a major interconnection leans on a neighboring one during peak flows. The kind of lean that makes ratepayers in 5 states grateful and unaware. The delta pins hovered there more often than anywhere else. The facility is fenced, lit, and unremarkable. There's a padlocked gate and a camera that points at a gravel road. No soldiers. No hardened bunkers. No plaque. If there's a clock, that's where zero matters most, and it's unguarded in the way a metronome is unguarded. It's visible, dependable, and taken for granted. That's where the map stopped being theory and started being a countdown of another kind. Revelation, what the countdown really means. While we were tracing pins across gravel yards and quiet river gates, one thing stopped being a theory and turned into the answer that ties the whole mess together. The countdown wasn't a doomsday clock. It was a window, a synchronization gate that let multi-domain ingress slide through seams without colliding. Think of it as a green light that only exists for those who can see it. Air, sea, spectrum, grid logic, they don't meet by accident. They meet on a beat. First strike, in that frame, isn't a flare in the sky. It's paralysis on schedule. Not one hit. Everywhere at once, in the places that don't make noise when they fail. A countdown doesn't warn the public. It aligns the participants. What our pilots saw, the carrots pulsing, the tone rising, the lock at T00:00:03, was the lock-in moment, the point of no return where independent envelopes became a single choreographed move. After that, you don't chase contacts. You ride the geometry that's already won. Why hide it? Because admitting it means conceding we're out time. We can build jammers, add filters, throw scatter at the beat. But if the clock sits in the reference our systems trust, then our countermeasures become noise in our own ears. Command hates that sentence more than any footage. If the fight is time, the side that owns the reference writes the rules. You can't posture your way past that. You have to re-architect how you keep time. Here's the part nobody wants to say in an open brief. Our verification sits in timing patterns, not authorship. We can show subharmonics that line to Earth spin, deltas that map to bottlenecks, recalls that chase the week a pilot said, marker when active. We can't badge the builder. We can't paste a flag on the tone. That gap is honest. It's also weaponized. No attribution, keeps the story in a box labeled Anomaly until the window repeats somewhere you can't ignore. Meanwhile, the behavior reads like doctrine. Synchronization markers, temporal deconfliction, non-cooperative references, holdover drills, reference arbitration, hardened oscillators. Those are not the tools you buy for curiosity. Those are the moves you make when ingress isn't just crossing a border. It's walking through your scheduling. If the marker owns the minute, then the lanes belong to whoever keeps phase. That's control without occupation. We tested the idea against the quietest witnesses. Human reactions written in the margins when nobody thinks they're writing history. It felt rehearsed. We're swatting timing, not the hand. Better without us. They kept time. Those aren't slogans. They're field notes that admit the same thing. Precision beats power when power depends on precision. If you hold the second, you don't need a missile. You need a nudge when a controller is between breaths. Now tie the window to the map. The pins didn't land on prestige. They landed on flow control, electric interties, fiber meats, fuel regulators, water gates. If your countdown is a window, your first strike is a stillness. You don't break things. You make smart things decide to protect themselves at the worst possible moment. A protective trip is a safety feature. 3 trips across seams at once is a tourniquet on a limb the size of a country. Everyone lives, everything stops. And the dress rehearsal? A weekend that wore a solar storm like camouflage. Reports say auroras, logs say timing. The ring on radar wasn't weather. The phase drift didn't wait for the magnetometers. Comms fell back to line of sight because repeaters lost confidence in their reference. Afterward, nobody confessed. Everyone bought better clocks. That's not panic. That's a tacit admission that the window was real enough to budget against. The people in those rooms started speaking in a new grammar. Not push, but align. Not jam, but arbitrate. Not block airspace, but treat hours like airspace. You saw it in the liaison's calendar bands and heard it in the pilot's 3 words. Marker when active. That's not fear. That's professional language for a threshold crossed. He didn't need to see a flash to know the moment mattered. His job is to hold position. The marker's job is to remove the cost of motion. The physics we walk through becomes operational art right here. Gradient envelopes let craft move without screams. Phase lock keeps envelopes from fighting. A shared reference keeps domains from colliding. The countdown isn't a human-readable clock for drama. It's a handshake protocol in time. When a subsystem freezes to catch an epoch, when a loop tightens, when a seam goes from shared to seized. At 0, there's nothing to watch. There's only what fails to happen. Orders that don't route, relays that don't trust, screens that say normal while hands know better. So what now? The honest answer is simple, and it's not comforting. We can verify the scars where the method touched, tone analyses that repeat across gear, Annex lines that carry legal weight, Contractor recalls that behave like regret, procurement shifts that by discipline instead of bravado. We can't put a face on the hand. We're not going to pretend a logo solves the problem. The choice in front of the people who carry radios and sign work orders is smaller and harder. Rebuild assumptions around time. Treat external discipline as suspect during windows. Train silence as a tactic, not a freeze. Move critical operations off the seams during predicted bans. Harden holdover. Teach systems to vote against the strongest beat if its cadence smells wrong. That's not a slogan. That's how you keep the lights on when someone else owns the drum. And for the rest of us, the meaning lands where we live. The countdown isn't a prophecy. It's a method. It doesn't care if we look. It runs. The only lever we hold is to make seams less obedient to beats we don't command. Because if first strike is stillness, then resilience is rhythm you own, clocks that don't flinch, procedures that don't chase, and eyes that know the difference between weather and a window. The present tense, evidence we can show, limits we admit. Here's where we stop speculating and put down what survives daylight. Verified, not vibes. First, the tone work. Multiple labs, different hardware, different methods, same spine. A narrow carrier with subharmonics sitting on exact Earth rotation fractions, and sidebands offset by a consistent delta. Translate that delta to time, then to longitude, and you land on infrastructure seams, grid interconnects, data meet-me rooms, fuel junctions, water gates. The reproducibility is the point. Artifacts don't care about geography. These did. Second, the Annex page. We vetted the headers, routing codes, date blocks, classification stamps. Even the copier shadow that bureaucrats forget betrays real templates. The language matters. NTSTK protocol invoked, countdown telemetry observed op immediate. We've matched that formatting across other restricted annexes we can verify. We also traced taskings that followed. Utility liaison briefs, maintenance resequencing, temporal deconfliction in attendee notes. The paper trail threads through real offices. Third, the contractor recalls and specs. We're not waiving anonymous PDFs. We've got procurement lines that request temporal alignment modules, firmware changelogs adding reference arbitration, NDAs with prohibited nomenclature around NTSTK, and 2 recall notices timed to the pilot's countdown flight, one referencing coincident with T00 to 00 events. Different primes, convergent language, urgent behavior. That's commerce reacting to physics. Now the boundaries. NTSTK's full expansion? We won't claim it. Non-terrestrial strike kit fits the morphology and the behavior pattern, and 2 insiders acknowledge the letters in tasking, but neither would define it. That leaves us with a discipline theory, labeled as such. Ownership of the program? We don't know. The liaison's posture and the space force footnote on temporal deconfliction suggest a joint hand, but hard attribution is beyond what we can show. Intent versus capability is the third limit. The patterns line up like doctrine, synchronization markers, deconfliction by time, multi-domain windows, but intent is a word. Lawyers carry like a live grenade. We can show a method that opens seams. We can't hand you motive. That gap will be used to keep the conversation in anomalies instead of operations. We're not walking into that trap. We're staying on what we can prove. What we won't claim, a date for a first strike, an identity for the signal's source, a motive for the rehearsal. We won't dress conjecture as confirmation. We won't put words in a pilot's mouth or backfill a physics model with wishful thinking. When we say we don't know, it's not coy. It's the line between evidence and story. Here's what matters anyway. The pattern is operational art, not curiosity. You don't buy hardened oscillators, add reference arbitration, and run quiet drills because you saw lights in the sky. You do it because your systems flinched when a cadence showed up under your noise floor. You do it because a pilot's marker went active coincided with a base's generator checks being retimed and a contractor's modules being pulled. You do it because Windows repeat. Get this detail. Consilience is carrying more weight than any single dataset. Audio tones mapping to seams. Annex language matching on-the-ground taskings. Procurement aligning with timing hardening. A blackout weekend where timing excursions didn't match space weather peaks, followed by a surge in timing upgrades and Los Comms drills. These aren't isolated anecdotes. They stack into a picture that doesn't care if anyone likes it. The human piece anchors it. Our pilot didn't turn prophet. He turned precise. Marker went active. Then to his brother, watch the grid. He didn't say aliens. He didn't say programs. He said the part that matters if you work a switchyard or a console or a dispatch desk. The people closest to the seams wrote the lines that stick. Better without us. We're swatting timing, not the hand. Treat these hours like airspace. Those are operational adjustments. That's the present tense. So what can we show you, right now, without asking you to trust our narrator voice? We can publish the lab methods that found the subharmonics and the sideband delta, the exact windowing, the controls that ruled out aliasing and ground hum. We can show the annex's routing codes and the template matches in public doctrine, so you can see the skeleton. We can show you the procurement language across 3 primes, with identical phrases and differing logos, pointing at the same class of problem. We can show you the hobbyist captures that reproduce the carrier ridge and its fractions, captured months apart, states apart, rigs apart. We'll also show our nulls, the nights where the tone didn't show, the places where a seam wasn't lit, the captures that looked like nothing. Because absence matters too. The window repeats, but not constantly. You don't get credibility by painting a pattern everywhere. You earn it by admitting where it isn't. And when we reference program history, we'll keep the touchstones exact. ADIP 2007 to 2012. Tic-Tac November 2004. Where this leaves us is a narrow, useful lane. Evidence says a clock-like reference appears under noise, aligns with Earth rotation fractions, and encodes offsets that map to critical infrastructure seams. Evidence says at least one restricted annex invoked a posture, NTSTK, when countdown telemetry was observed, and that base-level actions followed that look like temporal deconfliction. Evidence says industry moved, recalls, upgrades, arbitrations, on timelines that kiss the pilot's flight. Evidence says a blackout weekend, wore space weather like a coat while timing did the work. What we admit freely, who built the beat is outside our proof. Why they're refining it is speculation. Whether NTSTK's T means terrestrial, transmedium, or something a handful of cleared people smile about is unverified. We're not crossing those lines with theater. The present tense is simpler. The method exists. The windows repeat. The seams are the aim. And the response, if it's going to be more than posture, lives in how we hold time when someone else tries to lend us theirs. You don't have to believe in UAP to harden a clock. You don't have to like acronyms to move an operation off a vulnerable minute. You just have to act like the beat is real, because the systems that run your life already do. The audience pivot, why this affects you. Here's the part they didn't plan on you. Not generals, not labs. You with a meter on the side of your house and a router on your shelf. Your vulnerability doesn't live at a base. It lives at the seams that feed your life, the power that holds 60 hertz, the water that opens on a schedule, the data that hands off without you seeing it, the fuel that moves at night while you sleep. If a clock slips at the wrong second, your day doesn't explode. It unthreads. This isn't theoretical. It's happening now in little, repeatable ways. Phone calls clip while your bars stay full. You say hello, and your mom hears, low. Then the call continues like nothing happened. That's 2 networks disagreeing on the exact second and reconciling on the fly. Countdown method in action. The marker opens a window, the seam argues, and your handset politely smooths over a timing fight you can't see. Card readers hesitate in waves. 3 people in a row at a gas station see processing hang, then all clear within the same breath. That's not a bad terminal. That's a payment backbone stepping to holdover because an external reference just twitched. Seams and countdown. The marker nudges the clock your processor trusts. Arbitration kicks in. Everyone clears at once when the seam realigns. Traffic lights lag along a corridor. You hit 3 greens that feel too long, then an all-way red that holds a beat past normal. Across town, Bus trackers freeze for a minute before jumping to the next stop. Same window, same cadence. The city won't brief it as timing. They'll call it signal coordination. Underneath, the SIEM just rode the beat. Work calls drop for exactly 30 seconds on your IP phones. No missed call in the log, nothing for IT to fix. Your provider writes, brief network hiccup. Translation. The repeater spine took a breath while reference arbitration decided which clock to trust. That's the countdown's quiet edge. No boom, just a synchronized pause. Your smart home gets polite. Thermostat commands lag, then batch apply. Security cameras stamp 2 frames out of order and pretend they didn't. Your Wi-Fi plugs handshake in 4 seconds instead of 1. Machines are smoothing a disagreement about now. The SIEM flexed. The window passed. Hospital pagers ring late in a cluster. A nurse looks down and every device shows the same 7-second slip, then catches up. Dispatch says radios are line of sight only for a bit. That's a repeater farm stepping off the external beat on purpose. Countdown window meets SIEM, and trained people switch to the path that ignores it. These are the soft edges of the same method the pilot felt. A marker opens. SIEM's grid, data, fuel, water arbitrate their clocks. Your world breathes, clip, lag, batch, catch up. No headline, just a scheduled stillness brushing your day. A moment you'll recognize when it lands. You're in a grocery line. The card reader hangs on processing. The overhead lights flicker once, not dark, just a breath. The traffic light outside holds red a beat too long. Your phone shows full bars, but a call won't connect for exactly half a minute. That's when it clicks. This is a window, not a storm, not a hack. A countdown you can't see just locked your seams together. Here's what to do in that minute. Step off the scene. If you're on a call, stop redialing. Switch to line of sight or text and wait 60 seconds. If you're paying, tell the cashier you'll run the manual path if it doesn't clear on the next cycle. If you're driving, don't force the intersection. Give the signal time to resync. Hold your own time. Turn off automatic time update on gear you control during known windows. Let your local clock carry you for a minute instead of chasing a reference that just got nudged. Choose the dumb path on purpose. LOS over repeater. Paper over portal. Manual valve over smart controller. The goal isn't heroic. It's to stop your system from trying to be helpful at the worst second. So what do you do that isn't doom scrolling? Start embarrassingly small and ruthlessly practical. Redundancies at home. Keep an inexpensive analog phone or a battery-powered radio that doesn't depend on a network handshake. If your power utility offers a text alert system, enroll, but also ask them how those alerts are time-stamped and whether they keep operating if GPS drifts. If they can't answer cleanly, that's a SIEM you should treat as unreliable during weird hours. Offline backups. If your work depends on files or orders landing on time, set your systems to make local snapshots without cloud login. Sync when the world behaves, operate when it doesn't. If a countdown window slides through a Monday morning, you keep moving while everyone else waits for a spinner to stop. Analog fallbacks. Keep a paper map in your car. Carry a list of critical phone numbers in your wallet. If you manage a storefront, have a manual card and printer in a drawer and a policy for when you use it. People laugh at the knuckle buster until the POS terminal chases a phantom clock. Power discipline. A small, well-maintained UPS on your modem and router buys you a clean edge when blips hit. Not because your provider stays up, but because your local gear won't reboot right when the reference shakes. If you run a small server or NAS, set it to hold its own time during outages. Disable network time updates during known events. Let it drift on your terms, not someone else's. Water and heat. Know how your home or building's water controls behave. Smart valves and controllers can lock safe if they see timing anomalies. Keep a manual override path and know how to use it. If you're in an apartment, ask your manager how irrigation and boiler controls get their time. If they blink, you plan for a day where it's not broken, it's protecting itself. Civically, you carry more leverage than you think. Your utilities answer to boards and commissions that hate the word SIEM, but they care about it when ratepayers ask the right questions. Call or write and ask 3 specifics. What's your plan for timing hardening at grid interconnects? Do your substations and PMUs have holdover beyond 30 minutes if GPS becomes untrustworthy? What reference arbitration logic is deployed to prevent a device from chasing the strongest beat when it's wrong? Those exact phrases have been on purchase orders. Watch who pretends they've never heard them. Attend a public utility meeting, and ask about temporal deconfliction during maintenance planning. You're not accusing. You're asking if crews avoid critical timing windows before taking seams offline. If they look confused, they're not being briefed. Talk to your county emergency manager about drills that assume GPS and satellite time are suspect. Ask if their comms plan includes LOS fallbacks that don't depend on networked repeaters. Ask when they last tested GPS off. The answer shouldn't be never. Documentation is a civic act here. The ask is simple: document anomalies, share evidence, not rumors. If you run a ham shack, an ADSB rig, or even a decent SDR record, keep raw I/Q captures. If you catch that narrow ridge and its subharmonics, note the exact time and your gear chain. Don't draw circles on screenshots. Keep the data and the chain of custody clean. 2 labs reproduced our findings because hobbyists saved the raw. If you work near a seam, substation, pump station, fiber meet, keep a simple log during weird weekends. Note delays, timeouts, fallback modes. Don't trespass. Don't poke. Just observe. If 3 facilities report the same odd lag in the same hour, that's signal. If you're a dispatcher, lineman, nurse, or operator, write micronotes when the world breathes wrong. Pagers plus 7S, LOS only, PMU drift flagged, POS stuck, cleared in wave. Those lines will matter later, more than an op-ed. And for your own sanity, learn to separate panic bait from pattern recognition. A single outage is life. A slip that arrives on a known cadence, hits a seam, and leaves with procurement in its wake. That's the pattern. We'll publish the methods so you can test what you see against something firmer than a headline. A quick human moment from the field to pin this down. A night shift controller told us he heard the tone. Not a siren, just a slow rise under the room, and lost 2 screens for 90 seconds. He didn't hit the panic button. He flipped to paper procedures, ran LOS comms for 3 calls, and logged the time of every lag. The next week, his shop got a new oscillator and a note that said, "Reduce dependence on external discipline during windows." He did the boring thing right. That's the model. Last, know the soft tells in your own life and neighborhood. If your traffic lights lag in sync with your groceries card readers and your kids' homework portal, treat that hour like bad weather. Don't schedule the critical action for that minute. Surgery, valve swap, database cutover. If you can't avoid it, plan a manual path and assign a human to hold the second. That's what operators already do when they stop trusting the picture. It's not romantic. It's how systems survive windows. We opened a loop about that tone, and we'll close it with this. When you hear about auroras and your feeds fill with sky photos, keep one ear on the ground. If the ridge rides again, if the cadence tightens, it won't ask permission. Your job isn't to name it. It's to keep your corner from freezing when a marker goes active somewhere you'll never see. The last key, the tone returns. We didn't have to wait long for the hum to come back. It showed up on a Tuesday, the kind of midweek night where nobody expects a story, buried in a hobbyist capture from a backyard in the plains. No lights in the sky. No chatter on VHF. Just a narrow ridge under noise with the same spine we'd mapped from the cockpit tape. The operator didn't even flag it as strange. He saved the raw I/Q because the waterfall looked too straight. When we laid that new ridge against the pilot's carrier, the bones matched and something else did too. The subharmonics fell on the same Earth rotation fractions, but the sideband delta was tighter by a sliver. That matters. Narrowing implies refinement. Someone's tuner hand was steadier. The offset hugged longitudes we'd already drawn in pencil and dared us to ink them. We brought 2 labs back in, not to chase ghosts, but to try to break the match. One ran long window FFTs to pull coherence out of a night's worth of drift. The other locked into short windows to see if the cadence stayed put when you chopped time. Both reported the same thing. The fractional stack held, and the sideband offset kept its new, narrower tolerance across hours. Different antenna, different preamps, different noise floors. Same drum. Here's where we tested ourselves for wishful thinking. We asked the labs to find any periodicity at all without priming them. Blind. They circled a weak ripple in phase noise and wrote, recurs at T is almost equal to 86 for 100/n. That's day length cut into neat slices. A signature nobody should be able to fake casually on consumer gear across distance. They then noted a second, fainter alignment at a shifted phase that matched the subharmonic shadow we'd seen lock at T. 00:00:03 on the pilot's tape. No UFOs, no annexes, just math that refuses to be bored. We took the narrowed delta and ran the map again. The pins didn't spread. They sharpened. The big intertie in the flatlands still lit. The meet me room by the tracks still blinked. A pump station that everyone drives past without seeing gained a hair of precision in our overlay that aligned with a maintenance notice moved up by 2 weeks for component reliability. Independent of us, a regional utility posted a procurement tweak for oscillators with improved short-term Allen deviation. That's how grown-ups say, we saw the wobble. Pushback did its job. Artifact. Intermod. Leakage. We fed the list to the labs. Intermod changes with the front end. Our offset didn't. Leakage smears, our stack sharpened. Artifacts due to sample clock drift don't snap to Earth rotation fractions and then reproduce with a tightened delta months later. One engineer tried a curveball. What if you're hearing SATCOM housekeeping? So we dragged in a SATCOM beacon recording from a test rig we'd never touched. The beacon's cadence rode a different scaffold. Clean, but living in another room. We added a human check at the edges. A night shift controller we trust, the one who went los for 90 seconds, sent a quiet note. Same slow rise last night, screens blinked once, no loss. Logged at 12 past. Our captures ridge rose at 12 past, local. A tech at a fiber meet, off record, mentioned a micro holdover drill, that same night, triggered by reference arbitration crossing threshold. He shrugged like drills happen. The cadence didn't shrug back. This is where we separate panic bait from pattern recognition. One hum doesn't mean anything. A spine that repeats across gear, anchored to a planetary metronome, with a sideband delta that maps seams and then tightens. That's a pattern. 2 labs found it. 3 hobbyists caught it. A controller heard it and stayed calm. A utility bought better clocks. A contractor edited firmware to reduce loop bandwidth during cadence anomalies. The tone returns because the method returns. Refinement is the story. We also looked for the miss, nights where nothing rides the floor, days where the ridge doesn't stand. They exist. The window isn't constant, it's scheduled. That tracks with everything else we've seen. Chessboard nights, rehearsal weekends, quiet in between. If you're practicing a strike that looks like stillness, you don't hammer the beat every hour. You sneak in when the room echoes in your favor. So why tell you this now? Because the delta's tightening means one of 2 things, and both matter. Either someone is calibrating their reference against our environment, learning the flex of our seams and shaving the lag, or we're hearing our own countermeasures becoming less clumsy. The field notes don't support the second. Scatter still makes our picture worse, and there's cleaner. Arbitration drills still swap to holdover at the same bands. The procurement curve still points at discipline, not dominance. A small microstory seals this into the human column. A controller in a regional dispatch heard the tone again. He called it that slow incline, and lost 2 visualization panes for 90 seconds. He didn't wait. He read the paper. Line of sight carried 3 calls. He logged every slip to the second and taped a handwritten note to the rack. During Windows, trust holdover. A week later, his rack got a new oscillator and a firmware flag labeled cadence suspicion. He's not chasing lights in the sky. He's marking time in a room that feeds you. We've said it before and we'll repeat it until somebody turns the ridge into a headline. This isn't a warning bell. It's a method. The tone's return isn't a scream. It's a metronome nudged tighter, zeroing in on the seams we've drawn for months. The map doesn't change. The rhythm does. That's why our next move wasn't another email to a public affairs office. It was to line up every capture we have with every weird minute your town's quietly logged and see how clean the overlap is. We'll publish the methods. We'll publish the nulls. We won't hand you certainty. We'll hand you a beat you can check. And when the auroras trend again and the feeds fill with pretty sky, keep an ear for the low rise under the room. If it shows, don't panic. Step off the scene. Hold your own time. Because the last key isn't a new word in an annex. It's the same tone closer, asking the same question the pilot answered in 3 words. Marker when active. The HUD at T:0:0:03:12 wasn't warning him. It was recruiting him, forcing a choice inside a window he didn't control. When the frame froze at T:00:00:03, the room didn't shake. The world got quiet because the beat took over. That's the tell. The countdown is not drama. It's a method that turns seams into levers, then pulls them on time. That window now lives where you live. Not in cockpits, at your seams. The card reader that hesitates, the repeater that breathes, the pump that protects itself at the worst second. The pilot's 3 words: marker when active. Translate in your life as a minute where smart systems get polite and stop trusting themselves. No flash, just stillness on schedule. So treat time like airspace. When a window opens, step off the scene. Do this now, harden your minute. Keep local fallbacks, los comms for your team, a manual path for payments, a paper list for numbers that matter. Make your systems vote. Turn on reference arbitration where you can. Disable automatic, helpful timing updates during known windows. Hold your own clock. Move off the edge. Don't schedule critical cutovers, valve swaps, or database pushes on forecasted windows. If you must, assign a human to hold the second and a path that works without external discipline. Ask your providers the uncomfortable 3. What's your holdover if GPS drifts? How do you arbitrate references? Do you practice temporal deconfliction during maintenance? If you work the seams, substations, pump stations, fiber meets, dispatch, log the minutes that feel wrong. Pager lag, los fallbacks, PMU flags, processing waves. Send the evidence, not anecdotes. We'll publish the methods so you can check our math and add your pins to a map they can't scrub. The pilot saw a lock, not a bomb. You'll see a pause, not a headline. That's the strike, paralysis on schedule. And the counter isn't louder jammers. It's clocks that don't flinch and procedures that don't chase. We'll release the lab pack, the procurement receipts, and the blackout overlays next. Plus a public method for spotting the ridge and its fractions on consumer gear. Subscribe if you need the tools. Share your window minutes if you have them. Tell your utility you expect temporal deconfliction like you expect safety vests. Final image and hold it. The same invisible seams that ran through his HUD, grid interties, fiber meets, pump logic, run under your street. They're the heartbeat behind your fridge hum, your traffic lights change, your kid's homework upload. Somewhere, in a quiet minute you won't notice until it matters, a marker will go active. When it does, don't wait for a siren. Step off the seam. Keep your time.